Well, hey there, scholars. This is Dr. Franklin, and this is a mini lecture dealing with online research methods. My agenda for this mini lecture is the following. One, I want to talk about the history of the internet, which actually spans back to the late 60s. Also want to spend some time talking about the 3 psychological research approaches. You'll find that some of them are research approaches that are used in offline settings and simply translated to cyberspace. And then you'll find that other research practices are phenomenological in nature. Finally, I'll conclude this presentation by talking about ethical issues that arise in the context of online psychological research. Given that research is being conducted in this new environment, it's important to take into consideration contextual factors surrounding social responsibility, minimizing harm, maximizing benefit for participants, informed consent, etc., because these issues show up differently in cyberspace than they do in our offline lives. Do you recognize some of those icons off to the right? The origins of the internet can be traced to the Department of Defense funding a research project through the Advanced Research Projects Agency Net to be used at universities and labs across the U.S. The first 4 nodes or locations of the project occurred in 1969, followed by 15 more projects in 1971. Email was invented in 1971. The internet as we know it occurred when international nodes or locations were added and the Defense Community Agency established and standardized the Transmission Control Protocol, that's TCP, and the Internet Protocol, IP, for billions of users. By early 1995, the improvements in software and hardware made the internet more user-friendly, and these improvements led to the internet becoming a research tool that is qualitatively different to other forms of electrical connectivity. In the last 20 to 25 years, researchers have accrued a lot of experience with using the internet for research purposes. This is largely due to the fact that people who researchers want to study have access to the internet, which was not the case 25 years ago. So given that there is a large swath of people accessing the internet, a key issue for most researchers is whether sufficient numbers are available to render any samples generated free from bias. Skitka and Sargas identified 3 approaches to conducting psychological research, and I'm going to identify and discuss those approaches now. The first approach is a translational approach, and this simply involves using methods and materials originally designed for offline usage and adapting them for the internet. This could involve taking paper and pencil measures and translating them into electronic means for dissemination purposes. An example of the translational approach could be taking a paper and pencil academic self-concept inventory, which is an inventory designed to assess students' confidence in their academic abilities, and translating it into a Word document to disseminate, or using Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey to disseminate it to a group of students. The second approach is the novel approach, and it sounds like exactly what it is. This involves using new approaches and methodologies that are unique to online research and not seen in non-internet based research. These are typically projects marked by creativity. These approaches involve utilizing free data sets online or manipulating aspects of a site with the administrator's support and informed consent of the participants to see how it influences behavior. The third approach is a phenomenological approach, which involves investigating how technology usage or the internet impacts psychological, social, emotional, and behavioral functioning. An example of the phenomenological approach could be disseminating a survey to individuals who use an online support group for weight loss to determine how the online social support group is impacting individuals. Sending out a link for the survey would involve a collaboration with the online social support group's administrators. In terms of the methodology used in online psychological research studies, it appears that in some analyses, experimental approaches are the most popular, followed by correlational studies, then qualitative studies, and then finally descriptive studies. In terms of sampling procedures, most researchers tend to target a particular group, followed by researchers going with opt-in groups, and lastly, there's the usage of random samples. Now, most of the research conducted online tends to be experimental, followed by correlational, and then followed by qualitative. Now, there are a number of potential benefits of online data collection, such as access to hard to reach populations, reduced cost, flexibility, and convenience. Some of the challenges that come with online data collection involve possible lower response rates, loss of control over the research environment, and technical problems. For the remainder of the lecture, I want to discuss some other challenges that show up with online data collection. Ethical issues. The ethical issues that arise in the context of online psychological research are not unique to the internet, but are seen in any research involving the usage of human subjects. There are four main ethical principles that guide the British Psychological Society's Code of Human Research Ethics. These four main ethical principles are the following. 1. Respect for the autonomy and dignity of persons. Number 2. Scientific value. Number 3. Social responsibility. And 4. Maximizing benefit and minimizing harm. Although the Association of Internet Researchers has published guidelines, these do not necessarily mirror the principles and standards found in the APA or BPS codes, and thus should not be solely relied upon. Now let's begin by focusing on respect for autonomy and dignity of persons. Given that there are a variety of ways in which data can be obtained on the internet, one must consider the privacy of the individuals when encountering content online. On the internet, the difference between public and private data can blur depending on the physical location of the person when they posted the information and the form being the website, social media, etc., where the information is posted. So an ethical researcher must consider the nature of the content that he or she would want to use, as well as consider how usage of the information would impact the person. In most cases, it may be more appropriate to seek informed consent of participants by engaging in a partnership with site administrators. It's important to note that informed consent from one person does not equate to you respecting the autonomy and dignity of other persons who may have information linked to your party of interest. For example, a Facebook profile with location tags involving other people. Still, along the lines of respect for autonomy and dignity of persons, individuals' confidentiality must be upheld. Some researchers may be surprised as to how easy it is to trace online data back to its source. The simple insertion of a quote into a search engine from a discussion board forum used could allow someone to determine an original source. Publishing research and allowing access to data sets should be done with caution and, of course, informed consent. Researchers may help to maintain confidentiality by searching for the quotes themselves prior to publication, or perhaps summarizing quotes for publication purposes to reduce the harm associated with a lack of anonymity. In terms of copyright, researchers should be mindful that copyright often rests with the web hosting company or the author, and this is especially the case with social media. Researchers should consider whether it would be more appropriate to obtain permission to use data, given that online data not protected by copyright is the only data that can be considered to be in the public domain. Valid consent must be sought if the data is protected by copyright or there is that undisclosing of information and that it cannot be justified on scientific claims. Informed consent should involve the researcher laying out the purpose of the study, what is expected of the participants, and ethical rights. Additionally, the researcher should lay out any foreseeable risk or consequences associated with being a part of the study. Additionally, there's more. Participants need to be aware of the fact that they can withdraw from the study at any time, and any restrictions in place about how their data can be removed should be laid out clearly. Mechanisms need to be in place to allow participants the opportunity to withdraw midway through the survey if they choose, and it seems to be best practice to ask the participant outrightly if they would want their data removed from a debriefing survey. The right software would be necessary to ensure that was possible. Since we're discussing debriefing, at the conclusion of the research project, individuals should be debriefed and given a contact or the opportunity to ask questions. If administering an online survey, researchers may find it better to get participants to explicitly endorse that they've read the debriefing statement and that they are satisfied with its remarks. In terms of scientific value, the issue of the control is prevalent because with online psychological research, there is marked distance between the researcher and the participant. There are 4 issues that have a tendency to be problematic. Number 1, who has access to participate in the research study? Number 2, the environmental conditions in which participants are engaging in the research. Number 3, feelings, thoughts, and emotions of the participants. And then number 4, variations in the research process as a result of different software and hardware. A researcher should reflect on how all of these issues affect the scientific value of their study. In terms of social responsibility, the ethical researcher should be mindful of how the collection of data for their research study or their presence online could potentially disrupt communities and perhaps increase the likelihood of participant bias or outright rejection. Should a researcher enter these online environments in a clandestine manner, the scientific justification must be robust and warranted. In the event that the researcher elects to publish findings, whether just in a university library or in a peer-reviewed journal, the researcher must consider how the findings may generate more interest in their investigated group, and the researcher must ensure that information will be kept confidential. Lastly, in terms of maximizing benefit and minimizing harm, a researcher needs to consider how the potential harm can be minimized throughout all stages of the research process. Additionally, an ethical researcher must consider the types of processes and procedures that will need to be put in place to reduce the likelihood of the participants being harmed. In order to do this, all of the aforementioned principles, autonomy and respect of dignity, scientific value, and social responsibility, will need to be considered. In the event that some ethical dilemmas cannot be resolved, then it may be in the researcher's best interest to conduct the research offline. For example, ensuring that participation in an online study will only involve individuals over the age of 18. My brief survey of some common ethical issues here is not comprehensive, and other reading literature should be sought. Online psychological research ethics is not markedly different from human subjects research ethics. What's important is the interpretation and application of ethics codes to the online environment. It's not the case that considering these ethical issues will be straightforward based on whatever research study you're trying to conduct. However, keeping these dilemmas in mind will increase the likelihood that you will make sound and ethical decisions when you go about your research.